Good afternoon, and welcome to this POLITICO Sustainable Future Summit discussion on hydrogen, clean fuel of tomorrow, or pipe dream. As we go along, please do tell us what you think. A few housekeeping rules. It's via the Swap Card app that you will find the questions box to submit. You can go ahead and test it out right away by participating in our poll. Which transport applications for hydrogen would you most like to see rolled out first? With me today, we have quite a great mix of people. We're starting with, from Brussels, the European Commission's Director General for Energy, Dieter Jorgensen. From France, the CEO of Transdev, a global leader in transportation, Thierry Mallet. And from Germany, we have the Director General for Policy in the Ministry of Transport and Digital Infrastructure, Klaus Bonhoff. Thank you all so much for making the time today. And just to get things started, when we talk about hydrogen as the energy source of the future, what most people mean is hydrogen instead of something else. In other words, instead of a natural gas, a diesel in your car, something that either emits a lot of pollutants or a lot of greenhouse gases like CO2. The legislation on this is expected to get the ball rolling in the next 2 weeks. I'm thinking of the cross-border Trans-European Network Infrastructure Trans-European Networks for Energy Infrastructure Regulation, which is expected December 15th. And most people expect that hydrogen will be included in this regulation as far as energy infrastructure projects to be funded. But I think what most people would like to know from Director Jorgensen is, will it be in place of natural gas? Director?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, let me clarify that hydrogen is not a source, it's an energy carrier. And it's an energy carrier that we can use to both store energy, store, for example, renewable electricity that otherwise is very variable. And so we need to fix the storage aspect of that. So it's an energy carrier rather than a new energy source. The second point I thought would be useful to make is that we need to look at hydrogen as an energy carrier in the context of the full energy system. We need to integrate our energy system in order to become carbon neutral or climate neutral by 2050, and in order to achieve the objectives we're setting ourselves for 2030. Only if we have a more integrated energy system will we be able to integrate higher levels of renewable energy into the system. We need to become more energy efficient as part of that system. That means making better use of the energy efficiency savings we have, lowering our consumption. It means electrifying much larger shares of our system and of our consumption, heating and cooling, for example, but also some aspects of transport are being electrified in order to become cleaner compared to the fuel-based, the gas or oil-based appliances we see today. And then we need a more circular energy system, making better use of the waste heat we have, for example, for data centers or for housing or for industrial processes. And this is where, and this is my third point, this is where hydrogen comes in. First of all, as I said, we needed to integrate these higher levels of renewable energy into the system because of the variation in production of wind or solar energy. If we can bring that in and transform it to hydrogen via electrolysis, then we have it stored, we have it as a gas that can help many different appliances and therefore integrate into our system. So a necessary part between the electric side of things, the electrons and the molecules that are needed for many appliances. So really a necessary part of the greening of our energy system. And in that context, indeed, the hope is that over time, many industrial processes and in some other processes in transport, it can replace fossil gas as we know it in our system. But of course, in order to get there, we need to make sure there is a market. We need to make sure we've got the supply side right. And that's one of the aspects we're working on, and we have set out in our hydrogen strategy by setting really ambitious targets for electrolyzer capacity in Europe by 2030 and from there. And we, of course, also need to look at the demand side, what industry, what transport process, what transport means could use hydrogen, and how do we help that market getting started? And that's where I think the Clean Hydrogen Alliance that we have also established really has an important role to play on the market, both on the supply and demand side.
Absolutely. And just for the readers watching, some of you may know this, but it's of course useful to clarify. Right now, there are two sort of broad competing ways in which you can make hydrogen, H2, clean burning gas. You light it on fire and it makes water. It sounds amazing. You can make it starting with water. So you've got a big electrolyzer which got a jolt of electricity. You zap the H2O, you've got the H's, you've got the O's, it's perfect. But the vast majority of hydrogen that is on the market today is made out of CH4, natural gas. So you start with a steam, I think, is the most common, but you're stripping out the C's to get the H's, but then you've got CO2, you've got CO, carbon monoxide. So on that note, I just want to press Director Jorgensen a little more, because you talk about this issue of supply. Now, we know there is a growing, we hope, amount of renewable electricity that will be able to go into making this process, but will we be seeing EU public funds going into hydrogen and no longer funding natural gas infrastructure?
Thank you. Well, first of all, just to come in on the point you made, indeed, the hydrogen that is currently in the European market is, first of all, what we would call grey hydrogen. So it means it's based on fossil gas. It's not clean. And secondly, it really goes into as feedstock into industrial processes. So it's not really used as an energy source in a broader sense in the transport sector, for example. And so that's there. There are two elements for change there for the future. First of all, we have set ourselves a target as regards renewable hydrogen, but we also know as getting towards renewable hydrogen, we need to make use of all the different types of hydrogen we can to start building both supply and demand. So what we call blue hydrogen, decarbonized natural gas, as you also referred to, but also hydrogen coming from other low carbon sources. A number of European member states have nuclear as part of their energy mix, and producing hydrogen from nuclear is also low carbon in the countries where that choice has been made in their energy mix. And as regards the proposal on the 10E regulation, which is coming out in the coming weeks, this will have to be determined by the College of Commissioners. It's still in our internal decision-making procedures, so I wouldn't want to prejudge what will be decided by College. But of course, the overall objective in reviewing this regulation on the trans-European networks in the field of energy, the overall objective is to make sure that it aligns with the European Green Deal objectives and with our aim of a green energy transition in order to become climate neutral in 2050. And so hydrogen, as I said, has a really important role to play there because it can help us integrate the energy system, higher levels of electrification in the system, and more clean energy in the system.
Thank you so much. And I want to pick up on something that you hinted at. We talk about the growing expectation of enough renewable electricity coming online to be able to make all of this clean hydrogen. But many people say that until we get there, there will be precious limited amounts of hydrogen, and we should be careful what we use it for. I have a feeling we're going to have some opposing views on today's conversation. I'm excited to dive right in. Please do not hold back. And I'd like to start with Director Bonhoff. Please tell me, from your perspective in transport, should we be using this to give everybody a hydrogen car, or what should be the priority?
It's not about the one priority. It's really to make sure that hydrogen and fuel cell technology, for that matter, are also part of that integrated energy system and, to that extent, transportation system as well of the future. So Mrs. Jorgensen very correctly pointed out, it's not a source, it's an energy carrier, and it will help to get more renewables into the energy system. And this is what we in the end need to decarbonize our energy system and to decarbonize transport. To that extent, we need to understand that transport is part of a future integrated energy system. And this is also what we highlighted in our national hydrogen strategy, that we take all applications in focus, that we look at producing hydrogen from renewable sources, that we look into transport systems for hydrogen, so the whole infrastructure, and that we then collectively look at the demand side, transportation, decarbonizing industry, chemical industry, and so forth. So I think this is key to understand when we talk about hydrogen. And then talking about transportation in more detail, we need to be zero emission at the end of the day. If we look at the options that we have, this is direct electrification with using battery electric vehicles, and this will be complemented by fuel cell drivetrains, running on hydrogen, which is also a zero-emission option. And then in the end, we're looking at obviously what market requirements are, but technologically, I think it will be very wise to have both battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles in mind, not only for environmental reasons, but also to make sure that we maintain the jobs that we have in Europe in the automotive sector.
I commend you for your very politically pleasing statement. I think that you've hit all the right notes, but I want to press you here because there are some arbitrage decisions to be made. And I recall you having mentioned on some of our previous conversations that, maybe for long distance, for heavy freight, hydrogen would make more sense than batteries. But, when these choices have to be made, where do you stand?
Well, let me ask that. What kind of decisions will have to be made right now? We have a clear decision regarding CO2 targets, also in the transportation sector. We have clear targets to decarbonize, to become climate neutral by 2050. In that system, we need battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles in all vehicle classes. And we do not have to take a decision today whether or not we build recharging infrastructure or hydrogen infrastructure, because we will need both. So there's no regret options to move on with both sides. In the end, this is not really limited by the amount of investment that is needed. I think we need investments in both infrastructures, and that's exactly what we're doing.
All right, thank you. I'd like to throw over to Monsieur Mallet. I don't know if you feel the same way as he does as far as applications of hydrogen and where it makes sense.
Thanks very much for inviting me today. But clearly, I believe that H2, hydrogen, is an attractive technology. It's a very attractive way to store energy. And I think it is wise to invest in energy, and I believe in it. But it's not clearly the solution. It's part of the solution, part of a mix of solutions. It has a lot of strengths when it comes to transport. It's fast refueling, much faster than what you will do with batteries. It offers a very wide range. The autonomy is much bigger. So it's very well adapted for coaches, for long distance, for train, for which probably batteries is not the solution. But there is a lot of still weaknesses that we have to come over in order to make it, let's say, an acceptable solution. First of all, it's very expensive, about 3 times what it would cost for a diesel solution, or even if I come to buses in cities, it's about 3 times the cost of battery electrical vehicles. So it's quite expensive. You have a big issue with yield, energy efficiency, because you will have to produce 4 times as much energy for hydrogen than you will need for batteries, because you have a very inefficient process. Electrolysis is an efficient process because you lose a lot of energy because you're also producing oxygen, which is not reused in the process. We have a big issue around regulation. So far, one of the concerns is safety regulation. Will they allow us to park those cars or the vehicles in a normal way? Are we going to be able to recharge them in an easy manner? So plenty of questions that we are still on the table today. And I think that we need to have a mix of solutions. Clearly, hydrogen will be a solution for long distance, for coaches, for trucks, but probably in the mid-range, not now, not probably 5 or 10 years, because we have to solve all those issues. In the meantime, we probably need to look at biogas, maybe biofuels, second generation biofuels, which are really renewable to bridge the gap. We are today, and we have to start some experience, because at Transdev today we are already running, which is small, 10 electrical buses and coaching on a daily basis. And by next year, it's going to be more than 50 that we will be running in Europe. And at the level of Europe globally, there is about between 100 and 150 such vehicles which are running on a daily basis, so we can understand better the technologies, the challenges, and what has to be done. But I think it's very wise to invest into it. It will be part of the energy mix. Its final solution will depend on the competition between the different types of energies. But something we should not forget when it comes to public transport, we will not be able to achieve the target we have only by moving from fossil energy to renewable energy. We'll have also to modify the way we move, and we'll need also to share more modes and to move from individual modes to sharing modes if we really want to achieve the target that we have.
Thank you so much, Monsieur Mallet. Now, just one thing I heard you say, I want to make sure I got you correctly. You mentioned a fleet of buses, but you said electric. Did you mean hydrogen?
I meant hydrogen, yes.
Okay, perfect.
Hydrogen buses. Because when it comes to electrical buses, the fleet of Transdev is today above 1,200 buses in Europe.
Okay, so it sounds like Transdev has already kind of made a decision. If it's got more than 1,000 electrical, or rather electric-powered buses, but it is sort of keeping a few eggs, shall we say.
It's battery-based buses, which are almost today on a par when it comes to cost over 15 years with diesel buses. So, but they are not long range, and you need a full night to charge them. So it's not a very, let's say, it's not a very agile solution.
And may I ask, for this small fleet you have of hydrogen buses, is it natural gas-based hydrogen? Is it renewable electricity?
It's always renewable hydrogen. We have small electrolysis system, which makes them quite expensive. It's more demonstration projects, which are very useful to understand the challenges, to understand the technology, to look at all the, let's say, the technical issues, as well as the safety issues that will come with hydrogen tomorrow.
And just my last question before I move on. These electrolyzers that you have to charge the buses, am I right in assuming that they automatically have a low carbon electricity source because they're in France and the majority of the electricity in France is nuclear?
Renewable energy to be able to run those electrolyzers.
Okay.
The process is really to have green hydrogen to run green buses. But it's quite expensive. We are between 3 and 4 times the cost of a diesel buses. So it's not something that can be replicable everywhere for the time being. And we still have technical issues. The fuel cell, for instance, will last only 5 years, while the bus is going to last 10 to 15 years. So we still need to improve on the technology. But I believe as the scale goes up, as we mass produce those technologies, we will, of course, improve prices and cost. There is a clear challenge around the cost of energy and producing hydrogen, which is also very expensive. There is not only the cost of the equipment, which I believe will be solved, but the cost of hydrogen itself is quite high.
Thank you for clarifying that. I imagine that it's a very different scenario in Germany, where you don't have a majority of nuclear low-carbon electricity power mix. So if you're trying to make the decision on how to source that electricity for the hydrogen, it's a different equation entirely. I want to go back to Director Jørgensen, something that I heard from our Director Boonhoff here. He mentioned that we don't need to make a choice right now. The infrastructure needs to be there, regardless of how much of each will be used. But I can imagine from your perspective, we've got the recovery fund package. There's a big pressure to build back better, build back greener. And so could you give us a little insight on how exactly you are making these choices between infrastructure that has to be rolled out, greening the transport sector, the role of hydrogen, and how to decide where to put the money and in what amounts?
Thank you. Yes, I would say, first of all, that I agree with what Klaus Bonhoff said, in the sense that there are different uses for hydrogen, but as Thierry Mallet has also said, it's a fairly expensive energy carrier, and we have to make sure that we make best use of it. I think that was also the premise of your question before. It's a limited resource, so where do we best use it? And there, because of these factors, we should use it in the sectors that are hard to abate. So as I mentioned before, there are a number of industrial sectors that it's otherwise that you can't easily electrify, and where hydrogen really becomes the tool you need to solve that, to lower emissions significantly from some energy intensive industries such as steel and cement, for example. In the field of transport, there are some aspects of transport that can easily be electrified. We are very far in electric vehicles in general. We are far in electrification of the train system. And so there, we don't necessarily need to look at hydrogen to help us green those sectors. But when it comes to heavy-duty vehicles, when it comes to maritime transport, and also when it comes to aviation, there is scope and a real interest in investing in hydrogen or looking at hydrogen solutions there. So again, we should prioritize on those sectors where hydrogen is necessary for for decarbonization and for lowering emissions linked to the transport sector or the industrial sector. But I do agree with Klaus Bonhoff that we don't need to make all the decisions now. And I think if we try to make all the decisions right now, we risk making wrong decisions. Why? Because a lot of the technology is in the process of being developed. There's a lot of research and innovation going on across Europe, but also globally. And so if we tie ourselves into certain solutions, then we risk really missing the point and losing out on some better solutions. So I think at this early stage of the market development and of the creation of this hydrogen economy or hydrogen ecosystem in Europe, it's important that we keep this openness to see, well, what will work best. And we should know a lot more about that over the coming years. In the meantime, what we are doing, and now I'm finally answering your question, in the meantime, what we're doing from the European side is setting up this common strategy, making available very significant amounts of financial instruments of investment, in particular as part of Next Generation EU, the recovery facility that we have suggested, and that should be agreed soon. Where we have suggested that member states, because this is largely a national choice, where will the investments go? This is not something we will sit in Brussels and decide. We're making the framework available. We're helping to bring agreement around the objectives of a green recovery that aligns with our Green Deal. But the actual choices of where do the investments go are made essentially at national level in the national recovery and resilience plans that member states are drawing up. In drawing up those plans, member states can rely on their national energy and climate plans, where they have set out a kind of a 10-year roadmap for how to achieve the climate and energy objectives in 2030, and rely, of course, on the European semester. And then we have offered guidance for investments to suggest certain sectors where investment would align both with the job and growth creation that's necessary as part of recovery, so the economic agenda, but also align with the green agenda and the lowering of emissions. And here we have, for example, investment into renewable energy generation, because in order to have clean hydrogen and in order to scale up green hydrogen and electrolyzers, we're going to need to generate significantly more electricity, and we're going to need to generate, in particular, significantly more renewable electricity or clean electricity. So that's one investment guidance we have given, is to suggest, well, let's look at powering up our electricity sector and investing more in renewable energy and grids there, or investing directly into electrolyzers for hydrogen. And then we're also suggesting investment into energy efficiency. That's not the topic of today's conversation, but I do think it's quite important to start with energy efficiency. We have a principle of energy efficiency first within Europe, because we need to lower our energy consumption, and that will then allow us to emit less from the consumption, but it will also make it easier to reach our targets for the share of renewable energy in the energy system. And finally, if you allow, just to come in on what Thierry Melly also said, we need to look at hydrogen, and I think Klaus Bonhoff said the same, we need to look at hydrogen as part of the solution. It's not the only avenue, it's not the only energy carrier that's relevant. Thierry Melly mentioned bioenergy, which is part of our renewable energy framework, and so important to look at the broader picture here. If we focus everything on one technology or on one use, once again, I think we risk missing the picture, and we risk not doing things in the most cost-effective manner. So we need to find the most cost-effective solutions and make best use of all the instruments we have, including hydrogen.
Thank you so much for that. And I think if I'm hearing correctly, if you're listening for stock tips, it sounds like you can't lose if you're investing in wind, solar, and electrolyzers. I'd like to go and take a few of the questions that have been submitted through our app. This one I would address to Director Bonhoff. It's from the Clean Mobility Working Group from Generation Climate Europe. Shouldn't electrifying be a priority over implementing hydrogen when we talk about trains? And I'd like, in your response, if you can, to talk a little bit about the difficulties between the types of trains, which can be electrified versus hydrogen within the specific context of Germany.
Yes, thank you for the question. Indeed, if we look at our long-haul train system, if you want to, that is mostly electrified. The parts that are not electrified are more or less on regional train level. And here exactly the question is, do you invest into catenary systems in order to electrify in what people understand in direct electrification? Or is it more cost effective to replace today's diesel engines that are being in use in these applications with hydrogen and fuel cell technologies, or with hybridized fuel cell systems that kind of have a mix of battery and fuel cell technologies on board. And all the calculations that industry has been doing in this field show that it is more cost effective on this regional train level to use hydrogen in hydrogen trains. So this is what we successfully tested in the northern part of Germany. This is what more than one train manufacturer has been developing today. And we will continue to do both. Wherever it is more cost effective to build catenary systems, fine, we'll do that. And yes, of course, we have a plan to make sure we even accelerate the planning processes for these. But then there will remain regional train areas where hydrogen is the more cost-effective solution to achieve zero emissions.
Thank you so much. And we do have another question also from Generation Climate Europe. And if you haven't submitted a question, please, there are a few minutes left, submit some questions. We'll be happy to take them. And this is to follow up on Monsieur Mallet's intervention. Planes motors, so we're talking about aviation here, are highly energy intensive. We do not have enough green energy. So for hydrogen to fill such a demand, it'll take years. What will we do to radically decrease aviation's emissions until then? I realize we don't have any airline experts on the call, but if anybody does have something to say on this, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
If I may, because we have an intensive discussion here exactly on the question on where should we use that green hydrogen that we're getting. And just one step back, the discussion is always focused around renewable energies are rare, green hydrogen is a rare molecule, very expensive, so let's look where we use it best. I have a quite different view because globally we have enough resources for renewable electricity. In order to transport that, we will have to transform that into molecules. So we will see a global market for these green molecules. And then it is very wise to think about using the molecules as molecules in different applications, including obviously transportation, but also including as a feedstock for synthetic fuels for those applications where indeed batteries, hydrogen, fuel cells are not really an option. And this is definitely aviation. This is in part the maritime system. So we need to make sure that we motivate this global market, but also to start with this European market on trading green molecules via hydrogen in different forms of energy carriers. This can also be discussed, and that will be up to the markets to find the most cost-effective solutions. But I truly believe that we will globally have that molecule available, and yes, then we'll also be able to use or to produce synthetic fuels for those applications that are not directly applicable to batteries or fuel cells.
Thank you so much. And just in case anybody at home is unsure, when we refer to synthetic fuels, the vast majority of this is chemically the same fuel you put in, let's say, the diesel for your car. The only difference is the way that we make it. We take the leftover chemicals from the chemicals industry, other applications, do some alchemy in there, get these C's and the H's together, and get that final fuel specification that you need. So you don't have to change the appliance, you don't need a different car, but it's making use of recycling, shall we say. The question, of course, is it reduces waste, but does it really reduce the CO2? I'd like to jump to the results of our poll regarding which applications in transport people most wanted to see hydrogen rolled out in. I can tell you that 56% of people want to see it in aviation and shipping, so the hardest to abate within the transport sector, long haul. It's not a surprise. Freight trains and passenger trains both got equal scores in second place, tied. And I have to say, passenger cars and buses, Monsieur Mallet, got a 0%. Now, we hear, let the market decide, let the market decide. I'd like to go to you. Do you think that you will be the one laughing at the end of the day, betting on these passenger coaches?
I think on buses, when it is short distance today, battery is a good solution. It's working very well, and it is at the same cost as I would say diesel. So it looks like most cities are turning to that solution. It seems to be a good solution. Clearly, hydrogen will be a solution for long haul. Where we don't have a solution, we have clearly a range issue and a fast refueling issue. So that's where hydrogen will fit better. I still have a key question, because when we speak about zero emission, we have also to take into account the footprint of the battery. And for me, I would say the jury is still open, because when we speak about zero emission, we speak about emission at the tailpipe. And I think that we will need at some point in time to look at the global view of what is the impact of the battery versus hydrogen, but not only looking at the energy production itself and energy consumption, but at the vehicle as well.
I think that is crying out for a throw to Director Jorgensen. I think we've heard a few things that touch the sort of regulatory aspect. There's the cost difference in price, and I know a lot of executives are saying, if it were more expensive to emit, there would be more of an incentive to push both for hydrogen and for electricity. So what can you tell us in terms of policy measures to sort of financially nudge everyone into green hydrogen or into just simply the low emissions technologies?
Thank you very much. There are two sides to it, to put it very, very simply. There is the cost side. What is the cost of what we produce? And I think, as Thierry Mallet has said, we need to look at the life cycle of our energy and of our different products, of batteries as well, to check, well, what is the footprint? What is the impact on our climate and the impact on our environment? And we're working on that from the regulatory side. And then we're, of course, working on that via our climate regulation, via our emissions trading system, where essentially emissions come at a cost that is reflected in the price, and that will therefore impact the market and impact our consumption. The other side of that is the investment, so what you call the nudging, where we need to make sure that we have both a clear regulatory framework, predictability, long-term targets that make it clear what's the overall direction we're going in, because that predictability is necessary to bring private investments in there. We've got the taxonomy around sustainable investment to give more clarity about what is sustainable and where does it make sense to go in the coming years. So that broader regulatory framework for investors. And then, of course, the public support. I mentioned the Next Generation EU. There's the multi-annual financial framework with a number of financial instruments that really can be used. And once again, these are national choices or local choices, but that can be used to support the green transition of the energy system and of the transport system and of other European industries. So those are the two aspects of that I think are particularly relevant. If I could come back to something that Klaus Bonhoff said that I think was also very important, which is the aspect of a global
Director,
market.
I'm so sorry to cut you off, but it looks like we've got about a minute and 30 seconds left. So I would be more than happy to hear this point perhaps at another time. For now, I'd like to thank all three of you for a lively 35-minute discussion that we've had. I think we've done pretty well with the time that we've been given. And again, please keep tuned for the rest of the Sustainable Future Summit. The next panel discussion is on the use of electric vehicles in Europe. So maybe we'll get to some of that carbon footprint of the batteries that Monsieur Mallet was talking about. Preceded by a short conversation with Commission Vice President for Interinstitutional Relations and Foresight, Maro Sefcovic. It'll start at 4:25, so there's a little bit of a break. And please stay connected, and we'll see you there. Thank you so much.